Well, hello and welcome. This is video number 4 in a 6-part series on the Protestant Reformation, and the focus of today's video is going to be the impact of Martin Luther's 95 Theses. So with that, I want to get started right in with the issue of indulgences. Now, Martin Luther, as you know, was a teacher of Scripture at Wittenberg, or the University of Wittenberg in Wittenberg, Germany. This was taking place in the 15 teens when he was an instructor there. And one of the things about Luther is through his study of the Scripture, he was beginning to reach some conclusions that were maybe a little bit different than what the Catholic Church was all about. And this happened to correspond with a time when the sale of indulgences was taking place in a way that ended up being very troubling for Martin Luther. So to try to keep it simple in terms of what these what indulgences are and how they were being used, basically an indulgence was a way that a person could contribute money to the church. And at most, this contribution of money through the purchase of an indulgence was really meant to maybe get you out of some of the steps that you might need to take to atone for sin. Really nothing more, nothing less. Now, the use of indulgences was a way for the church to generate revenue or raise money. At this particular time, the church was trying to raise money to build St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome. And so indulgences were sold as really a money-raising campaign, I guess you could say. Now, in the area where Luther was at, there was a friar named Johann Tetzel who was selling indulgences on behalf of the church, but he was putting a little bit of a twist into it as far as what people believed about purchasing indulgences from him. Rather than just saying this will, be a part of the sin atonement process for you, he was actually presenting them in a way that was leading people to believe that if they purchased the indulgence, that would guarantee their place in heaven. So in effect, he was leading people to believe you could buy your way into heaven. So for somebody like Martin Luther, who had reached the conclusion that salvation was based on faith and faith alone, this was pretty offensive to him, that people would, in his view, effectively be scammed out of their money on this false idea that they could buy their way into heaven. And it wasn't even just the idea that you could buy your way into heaven that was troubling, but on a practical level, the amount of money that people had to come up with to purchase an indulgence for an average person was very significant, maybe even up to as much as a half year to a year's wages. So it's not like this was, a couple of dollars to purchase an indulgence. This would probably be more like into what we would think of today as thousands and thousands of dollars to make a purchase for these indulgences. And so really it was through this that he began to recognize some issues that he had with the church that would lead to him putting together what was called the 95 Theses. What the 95 Theses basically represents is 95 formal statements against the church, or as he put it, these pardon merchants who were leading people astray. And so if you look through the entirety of the document, it takes issue with a number of things going on with the church, with especially with emphasis on this sale of indulgences and this false message of buying your way into heaven. Now, I'll mention the timeline a little bit here because a lot of things really do happen in a pretty short amount of time. A lot of times when you look, back over time, if you look through history, when there are big shifts that take place, it usually takes quite a bit of time for something to change. And one thing about this, especially beginning phases of the Protestant Reformation, is a lot of things happen very quickly. So as far as the 95 Theses were concerned, he presented these on October 31st of 1517. In fact, what he did is he, at least as the story goes, he nailed them to the church door in Wittenberg and basically challenged anybody to debate him on the topics that were addressed. And this is where the printing press becomes very important, because after he posted these, the, the document that he had put together listing these 95 theses was collected, and copies were made of it, and they began to circulate. And this really sparked a lot of interest and curiosity in people. And you certainly had both sides represented as far as how people felt about what they were reading. So people that remained very supportive of the church were concerned about some of these ideas. And there happened to be then a lot of people who may have had other frustrations with the church, looked at this and thought, yeah, he's really on to something. So whichever side you were on, once these ideas began to circulate, they were pretty impactful, got people talking and got people thinking. And so the other part that I want to speak to today is the type of opposition that Luther would then face, having put his ideas out there, and the fact that he continued to press for what he believed over the next few years. And so I want to just speak to two different types of opposition that he faced. The first being opposition from the church itself. And one thing about the church, especially at this time, is they were pretty accustomed to getting their way. Because if nothing else, one of the things that the church could always hold over somebody was the opportunity for salvation. Because the way the church taught things, if you were to achieve salvation when you died, there were a number of things that you would need to do along the way to make sure that happened. And the church was very much a part of many of those things. And so if they just threatened to withhold that, which the most intense way to withhold the possibility of salvation was to excommunicate somebody, usually just the threat of excommunication would get somebody to change their ways and fall in line with what the church wanted them to do. Now, at this particular time, the Pope was Pope Leo X, and after a few years from when these 95 Theses were originally posted, and he seemed to be stirring things up in such a way that it didn't look like it was going away anytime soon, and he kept pressing for what he believed, the Pope threatened him with excommunication, said, you take back your statements, you take back what you've said, or you will be excommunicated. Now, here's what is kind of funny in a way when you think about it with what Luther believed. Did Luther believe that he needed the church's permission to achieve salvation? And the answer, of course, is no. As we addressed in the previous video, he believed that salvation was based on faith and faith alone. So he didn't need the Pope's permission to achieve salvation. And what ultimately came of that is he ignored the Pope's threats. And in fact, they made a show of burning the decree or document whereby the Pope had threatened him with excommunication. And so what the church tried to do proved to be utterly pointless and worthless, at least as it related to Luther. So the church's efforts to shut him down failed pretty miserably. The other type of opposition that Luther would face is what I describe as secular opposition. So opposition not from the church, but opposition from a secular leader. Now, at this time in Europe, there was a position called the Holy Roman Emperor, which was a position where you had somebody who was like a king that had a pretty strong tie with the church and had some type of authority over much of what we would think of as Central Europe today, including the area in which Martin Luther himself lived. And so with the church essentially failing by the very start of 1521 to shut Luther down, then came the secular push. And so basically what came of this is, at the time, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V wanted to put Luther on trial, basically give him an opportunity to kind of take back what he said and kind of get in the right as far as the Holy Roman Emperor is concerned. And so there's a meeting that takes place in the city of Worms. And basically at the meeting, any opportunity Luther had to say he was sorry, say he was wrong, and make things good, he chose not to take. He basically stuck true to what he had claimed over the previous several years and maintained that. And so the result from this was the issuing of what was called the Edict of Worms. This came out in late May of 1521. And basically what it said was nobody was to give Luther any support. So the idea was to make it hard for him to survive in the hopes that he would change his ways, and that all of the writings of Luther that had been circulating were to be collected and destroyed. And this is a good early example of, once ideas are out there, you can't burn them away. But that was a part of the edict. And so if it worked like it was supposed to, Luther would end up suffering so badly, hopefully he would change his ways. But as it turns out, he had enough people who truly did support him, including people in significant places, that he was able to continue to live, continue to have shelter, food, and support. In fact, Frederick the Wise of Saxony put him up in his home for a pretty extensive period of time. And ironically enough, while he was basically in hiding and being protected by Frederick the Wise, he used that time to translate the Bible into German, thus making the Bible much more accessible to people than it had ever been before. So whether it was the church with excommunication or the Holy Roman Emperor trying to just make it hard to live, Luther pressed on and persevered through those obstacles and continued to profess what he believed. And we'll, in my next video, talk about what things started to look like then in and around where Luther had been having an impact in the next few years moving forward. So thanks for joining me.